Good evening. My name is Lou, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who's recovering from poor coping choices and anxiety. Hi, Tom. The VA likes to call this PTSD. I believe that I had to escape reality, and my primary choices were alcohol and sex. I also was constantly seeking approval and acceptance from others for my actions and choices. I consistently turned to alcohol when trying to relax or gain hope after having a rough day, or feeling the need to relax, or to calm my nerves, or to allow me to function. This was also how I would choose to cope with the changes and the bumps that life would throw at me. I was raised in a household divided, primarily because of abuse, both physical abuse and drug abuse. My parents divorced when I was roughly 5 or 6 years old, and my dad had visitation every 2 weeks, but what I remembered was him seeing myself and my brother more like once every 3 months or longer. Both my parents struggled with alcohol, but that's their testimony, not mine. The wedge between my parents is so great that my dad didn't come to my wedding because my mom would be there. I was primarily raised by my mother, but as we moved from shelter to shelter, there usually wasn't a lot of family time, food, toys, or other things that many would call necessary. My mom remarried when I was about 9, and he turned out to be very similar to my father. He was also an alcoholic and a drug abuser who also abused my mother. We were growing weed in our basement for a long time. Thank God that's not part of my testimony. I was also exposed to pornography and drugs through my teenage years. There was a point that I resented my birth father so much that I enjoyed calling my stepfather Dad. Despite my stepfather's exceptional examples, he was still the closest thing that I knew to a father. In my teenage years, somewhere between 16 and 18, my mom was one of the first people to give me alcohol and get me drunk. She did this so that she would know that I wasn't an angry drunk and that I could handle and function alcohol, or that I could function on alcohol. She also claimed this would ensure that I knew how to handle my alcohol and wouldn't display characteristics that were displayed by my earthly fathers. This further proved that it was okay to drink as a minor. The various books, magazines, and other things that were in my parents' room were so tempting that I would actually borrow these things and keep them until I was done with them. And I would return them thinking that my parents never knew and that I was slick. I was taught many things growing up, like you will only be what you achieve. And a common saying in my house is that you will achieve anything if you put your mind to it, which I also twisted into I can get away with it if I believe in it. Since I was the oldest son and child, I sometimes took on more responsibility than was necessary. So I was raised Roman Catholic, who accomplished all the major gates of spirituality as a child and as a youth, to include baptism, confession, my first communion, and also confirmation. But most of this was done as a teenager or younger. Even after achieving these spiritual gates, I drifted away because I didn't know about having a relationship with Jesus Christ. This eventually turned into attending church only 2 times a year for Easter and Christmas. I really can't put my finger on any one thing that was truly insane with the way I was living, because I was following the examples set before me. I thought this is what everyone was doing, and then just confessing about it and being forgiven. But I can't honestly remember a time that I would confess any of these to any of my childhood mannerisms to a Catholic priest as I was growing up. Maybe this was the insanity, that there was no perceived repercussion for my actions. I do remember one instance in particular that reminds me of a complete insane moment as a child. My brother and I shared a bedroom, which we had our beds in a loft, and my stepfather built a ladder along the wall so that we could get up and down from the loft. There was actually a point in my adolescence that I felt so alone and that I couldn't handle reality that I tied a sheet around my neck and also to the top rung of the ladder and jumped. Thank God that I wasn't a good knot tire then. As a teenager and young adult, I was very selfish and was taught to take care of myself and my family. I get into a few fights to protect our family name, and I was raised on the sayings of I got mine and family first. These early foundations were further amplified when I joined the U.S. Army and started my drive for success and leadership. My initial goals were to become an E5, a sergeant, attend Ranger School, and lead an infantry team. During my early military career, my twisted concept of family was further exacerbated by unit esprit de corps, and our unit, company, platoon, or squad is better than yours. So I began to take up many poor lifestyle choices that were fostered by the military, such as alcohol is at every event and it's used to meet people and to break the ice. It further taught me that male chauvinism was right in part of these elite units. This thinking was part of my lifestyle and carried over into every aspect of my life. The drive for the best was instilled in me and led me to enlist in the Army with an Airborne Ranger contract. I went to basic training and my pattern continued and were further exemplified because this was even more accepted and it was expected. I almost got kicked out of the military for failure to soldier. My oldest son was conceived out of wedlock in the first year of my military career. Even though I didn't see the error of my ways then, I wouldn't let him be born out of wedlock. It wasn't right for a child to be born out of wedlock, never mind all the other things that I was doing. Being raised in a broken house, I wanted better for him than what I had. As a result, I married my previous Walmart manager, and we would be a family that would never live together. I was in the military far away, in Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee, and they were my family in Illinois. Angela and I eventually divorced and have remained great friends despite my poor choices. Dominic turned out pretty good despite me being the dad that would only see him between deployments, some holidays, and maybe summer break. In Georgia, in the Ranger Battalion, I experienced more of this exact same attitude, even to a heightened level. I was indestructible and invincible. I was further surrounded in an environment that was created entirely on what I believed I had accomplished and what I could achieve. I received my first major incident in the form of a DUI when I was only 20 years old, and I had a fake ID that I made to fit in with the other guys. This further inflated my ego about how I could accomplish anything if I set my mind to it. I just had a bit of bad luck here or there and got caught one time, since I had never been busted before. I mean, seriously busted. I never got caught with anything and always told the truth. At least that's what I continued to tell myself in my mind, despite the other events of my past. During my military career, I never felt that I was unsaved and had numerous times where I would pray to God, but God never answered, so I turned my back on God. I've had many ups and downs over my life, both emotionally and spiritually. I was so far from God that there was a point that I said, God doesn't come in our house, and we don't go in his. This came when I was living in North Carolina with a bunch of guys, and our house was phrased the doghouse. I was truly engulfed in my numerous poor sinful choices and poor lifestyle. I would say that I was a spiritual ticket puncher, going through the motions and trying to do some things right sometimes. But many things in my life hadn't changed. As I continued to strive for excellence and self-achievement, I joined the Special Forces and became a medic. And in 2002, I was the biggest, baddest thing to walk the earth, and I was stationed here at Fort Campbell. In 2005, I met my wife, Shelley, and started attending this church, Clarksville Grace, Church of the Nazarene. And I was feeling the pull of Jesus, but didn't truly understand it at this time. We were starting a family, and I was trying to get my act together. My spirituality was launched into high gear when I was injured in Iraq in 2006, and I almost lost my left eye and would eventually thank God for allowing me to see that he saved me. I really didn't know what I was doing, but I began to remember a lot of things from my childhood about religion. Began to remember some of our scripted prayers, and I call them scripted because they're memorized word for word. And that's what I thought prayer had to be. I now realize prayer is an open conversation with God, and you can say whatever is on your heart. When I returned home, there was a church revival, and it was roughly 2007, and I went to the altar right over here, and I asked God into my heart to reveal the things that I had needed to work on because I couldn't see them. This was the beginning of an honest relationship with Jesus Christ. I began to get more involved with church and in Bible studies. We attended a church membership class, and I remember one of my first men's Bible studies with Pastor Steve and Pastor Zach and a few other men too. And I don't know if they called me this literally, but what I heard was I was a white knuckler because I was grabbing the steering wheel of life so hard because I was afraid to let God take control of the wheel that I was gripping it so hard that I was bearing white knuckles. See, during this time, I was doing all these things that got me to where I was, believing it was all me that did it, including some of it, if not all of it, was my sins that were following me. I was trying to get on God's path, but I was still doing many of the things from my past. On November 7, 2009, I experienced the breaking point, or revelation point, the place and time where I truly understood and realized how out of control my life was and how little control of it I had. Despite a DUI and an alcohol incident and running a car out of gas and trying to walk to a bar when I was already drunk, just to name a few incidents, I still needed a much larger sign, a distinctive sign that I had a problem. So I was a team sergeant, and me and one of my subordinate soldiers were on a trip, and I let my subordinate soldier drive drunk as I was in the passenger seat. This was a complete failure of leadership, responsibility, and judgment. This led me to acknowledge my alcohol issue, but I refused to admit alcoholism. We just played the incident off as any good soldier would have done the same thing. There was another drunk guy who was trying to give us an access code to get into an unmanned gate of a post that we were at. This gave us the ability to drive a vehicle onto the post with no vehicle inspection or anything, and this guy knew nothing about who we were. Even now, as I tell this story, I'm trying to get you to agree with me to justify my actions. We decided that if we could scare him and acted as if we were terrorists, maybe he would understand the gravity of the situation. I mean, this was right after the Fort Hood grenade incident. So we eventually were pulled over, and my junior weapons sergeant was arrested for a DUI. We were even accused of assault and abduction. Throughout all of this, my soldier and I talked, and I firmly believe that God was behind our enlightenment. We both chose to ignore our alcohol issues. I lost my team, I lost my position, and finally realized I had no control. This event drastically changed my life and my career. It was during this incident that I started to understand how little control I truly had. When we returned to Fort Campbell, we both self-enrolled into ASAP, the Alcohol, Substance, and Abuse Program, the military's answer to any chemical abuse issue. I continued to doubt that I was a real, full-blown alcoholic, and I also avoided some involvement in AA. I was hung up in step 0 for a little bit, but couldn't really put my finger on any issues. When I started to get on board, I just jumped in. See, during this time, I was trying to stay so busy and attended so many meetings and so many help groups and other self-recovery items that I really wasn't truly working anything. It took me about 3 or 4 months of being a dry leaf, and I finally broke down, saying my life is completely unmanageable and completely out of control. During this time, I continued to feel as if something was missing and searched for more of a spiritual program. Because I was struggling with AA involvement and my ability to define my own God, I talked to my counselor, and she informed me about Celebrate Recovery. And it was a church-based program. And it was in my church, held on Friday nights. How great is God that He put everything I needed. I just couldn't see because I was blind. God had to remove the scales from my eyes. Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. Acts 9:18. I didn't receive a name change like Saul did, but I do feel as if I'm a different person now than I was then. I finally listened to God and released the wheel that I was clinging so tightly to. See, during this time, I was beginning to feel a part of the church and was no longer a ticket puncher. I still failed to see many of my issues. I was asked to host a 242 group in October or September of 2008, and I'm glad I didn't realize when I was asked to be the host, I was also asked to be the leader, because I would have said no way. 242 is our church's answer to home ministry. It's a small group of like 10 to 12 adults who would dive into discussion about sermons or other biblical topics. We would meet nearly every second and fourth Sunday in the evenings. So through this entire process, God was transforming many of my little character defects. At least that's what I thought He was doing. He was changing my anger, my language, my chauvinism. I thought my issues were all being corrected, but I hadn't fully released them. There was actually a point that my anger got the best of me, that in front of my 242 group, I yelled at the children and Shelly and threw a chair up the stairs at the children. I didn't realize it until looking back at how blind I was to it all. I was exactly like my father, so demanding that no one would question or confront me, but still while knuckling it, doing things my way. What I didn't understand is that God was changing me into the spiritual leader I am now. God clarified the purpose of my life and showed me how to identify as his child, his soldier, his warrior, instead of my sin, my rank, or my ego. I'm the spiritual leader of my household, carrying his message wherever I go. So I decided to venture in here one Friday evening and was already over step one at this point because I was beginning to acknowledge that I had a problem. I just wasn't sure what it truly was. So I walked in like I owned a joint, kicked the door in, and I'm like, boom, this is the place for me, let's go. I mean, I'm just someone who struggles with alcohol. I mean, everyone disagrees with their wife from time to time. I mean, never mind the holes in the wall. I believe I was more nervous walking in here to celebrate recovery that first night than anything I've ever done. My palms were sweating, my heart was racing. I mean, what if my church saw me? Saw that I wasn't a good Christian? Saw I wasn't a good Christian, kind of like they will right now. Because the people of the church and their approval is everything, right? I mean, I'm a 242 leader. So what if my church saw or heard that I was in Celebrate Recovery? What if they heard I was one of those people? What if everyone heard? What if my 242 group hears? I now know that God brought me to AA on that path so that he would eventually get me here today in Celebrate Recovery, talking about how great our God truly is. I was quick to get involved in Celebrate Recovery, and I thank God that there was a group starting. So I enrolled in the 12-step group to work the books, and like most groups, it ended with me and my sponsor. My first step study taught me how to turn to God with all my hurts, habits, and hang-ups. Yep, sorry, page, you got flipped over. With all my hurts, habits, and hang-ups as I focused on my alcohol abuse. This is what brought me into Celebrate Recovery, and this is my only issue. I mean, between that, deployments, and my activities of life, and comparing myself to others, I thought I was good and way better than where I was. It took some time, but God eventually allowed me to see that I had more things that I needed to release, and soon got back after it. As I started my second step study, I began to focus on my sexual addiction and began to receive freedom from the world and gain joy and pleasure from the Lord. This habit wasn't as easy to overcome as alcohol was for me. God took alcohol away from me immediately after the incident, but my sexual addiction I struggled with for many years. I didn't believe that it was that big, bad, or large of a problem. I had it under control. I mean, doesn't everyone just give their senior pastor a large black trash bag full of things because you can't throw them away yourself? Eventually, I realized why I was struggling so much. I hadn't fully walked the steps. I did the books, but I did not do all the necessary work because I really feared making my amends with my father. I hadn't released the resentment yet. I was procrastinating, telling myself that God doesn't want me to make this amend yet, or he would design a trip where I would get to Chicago and be able to talk to him face to face. I finally called him one day just to talk about something random, and the conversation led me to telling him everything. I admitted the resentments that I had been holding on to against him. We proceeded to discuss all the issues, how I was raised, the lack of an earthly father, the lack of mentorship. But through all this, my dad was the one that wanted to ensure that I was raised Catholic. Despite all my resentment that I was carrying for my dad, his intentions were always the best. He wanted better for me than he had. I never understood this growing up, and I firmly understand how this step isn't for the other person, because during this, my dad proceeded to tell me that I had hurt my sisters and his wife a lot over the years. I was oblivious to this. This amends was really the largest thing that I feared. I resented so much of him and what I believed was the truth. I was blaming him for all my sins, specifically alcohol and the lack of respect towards women. Since coming to CR and allowing God to start working in my life, I began to look outward instead of inward. I have built many meaningful relationships with godly men. I'm a member of a men's accountability group that gathers weekly, and we all help each other, lifted up, prayed up, and walking with God. We keep each other there. God has taught me that women are to be viewed as sisters in Christ, not as objects to be conquered or a statistic to be compared. I do believe that God has directed Shelley and me together. I had to cancel a date with another girl to meet Shelley on our blind date. Did I tell you that I even met her cousin first in North Carolina? That was an interesting phone call. I also used to smoke and dip and chew, but through this journey, God has taken these urges from me, and I no longer seek these methods to cope with my life. I no longer turn to pornography and masturbation to reward myself or run to when times are difficult and I need a pick-me-up. Don't get me wrong, I still struggle particularly with anxiety, anger, and selfishness, but Satan's grasp on me gets looser nearly every day. I'm also learning more every day how to experience these emotions and not sin. I no longer fear my past, but understand it is a springboard that has launched me to a place I now am. I view my past hurts, habits, and hang-ups as empowering instead of hindering. I wouldn't be here today sharing with you if I was still afraid of the old me. Despite the mountains, I hope I didn't flip the page again. We'll see. My printer's not good. It doesn't print page numbers. Despite the mountains that appear to be in front of me, God is with me and whispering ever so softly, I am here and I will empower you. I recently got the opportunity to share my story with an individual who the next day found himself in a Celebrate Recovery out in Texas. God has directed me to be part of that men's accountability group, which has been going on for almost 5 years now. We meet at 5:30 a.m., and over the past few years, God has led me to be a leader at Grace Riders Ministry, a church board member here. I'm the T for our TEAM at Grace Nazarene Celebrate Recovery, where we're at. And not only am I the T, but I get the great honor of being the chipper. And it's been such an honor and privilege to be part of everyone's success stories. I believe this was all part of God's plan to get me more involved with Celebrate Recovery and to recovery leadership in general. The Bible verse that I continue to turn to in times of struggle is Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18. It's the armor of God. Finally, be strong in the Lord, in the strength of his power. Put on the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For our struggle is not against the enemies of flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic power of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to withstand on that evil day. And having done everything to stand, stand firm. Stand, therefore, and fasten the belt of truth around your waist, and put on the breastplate of righteousness, and the shoes that are fitted for your feet. Put on whatever will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of peace. With all these things, take the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and pray in the Spirit at all times. In everything, in every prayer and supplication, to the end, keep alert and always perseverance in supplications to all the saints. God has shifted many of things in my life over the years, over to his, including things like music. I don't really listen to anything except religious music now. I don't dislike other music. I just choose religious music. I look forward to waking up in the morning prior to everyone else and listening or reading to my Bible. Don't get me wrong. The enemy is still real and still lurking, like a snake waiting to strike. I continue to strive for the year that I read my Bible every day for that year. I'd like to say to any newcomer, it's not an overnight recovery process. Look at my history. It took almost a year of asking for light to be shown out of the darkness in the corners of my heart, and the power to actually accept and acknowledge all the corners. And even after walking 12 steps, I'm not clean. I'm renewed, reborn, like a phoenix that rises from the ashes. But my history has molded me to what I am today. I'm praying through my current 12-step study that I can overcome all my major hurts, heavens, and hangups in my life and focus on refining, becoming more like pure silver. For God tests us. You are refined. For you, God tested us. You refined us like silver. You brought us into prison and laid burdens on our back. You let people ride over our heads. We went through the fire and water, but you brought us to the place of abundance. Psalm 66, verses 10 through 12. I thank God for my experience that he gave me, because without them, who knows where or what I'd be. If it wasn't God's plan, I don't believe I'd be here today. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on you. 2 Corinthians 12:9. So today, as I celebrate my 41st birthday, let me tell you what I see today. I'm currently on book 4 in my 4-step study and approaching 7 years of alcohol sobriety in November and a little over a year of masturbation freedom. God delivered me from smoking, chewing, and dipping, or whatever you may want to call it. It's been 8 years since I've had a cigarette. God has been at work in all areas of my life, and I truly began to take notice when I returned to him during that revival. God has allowed me to take my drive for achievement and turn it towards nursing, as I was accepted in the Austin Peay's nursing program in the middle of 2016, and currently I'm over halfway through my first semester on the path to becoming a registered nurse. God has allowed me to have a new house, to continue to host our 242 group, and God has given me all this and many more blessings. One of the greatest blessings I have is my family and my wife, who supported me on my recovery journey, but is much happier now that I'm not in a meeting every day. My children, Ezekiel, Luke, and Zoe, have grown up to enjoy Celebrate Recovery and other church activities. My favorite lesson is turn, because I get to give a hurt, habit, or hang-up back to God and make room in my life for more of him. So if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. See, everything has become new. 2 Corinthians 5:17. New like the phoenix rising from the ashes. Thanks for letting me share. God bless.